Welcome to the Sound Bath with me, Angelina Kalahari, your host for the next hour. The Sound Bath's objective is to talk about and listen to music with particular emphasis on the human vocal instrument in an informative, educational and questioning manner. There comes a point in every singer's life when they need the services of an accompanist. But a good accompanist is as rare as a waterhole in a desert. Their effect on a singer's life, however, good or bad, can be enormous. And therefore, I count myself extremely lucky to have stumbled upon one such an exotic creature by the name of Elizabeth Dockrell-Tyler. We've worked together for around 8 years or so, and every single one of those have been, if not entirely enjoyable, certainly illuminating, educational, and a journey into the truth of the music we perform together. So, a short introduction to Elizabeth. She is a violinist and professor of piano and was born and educated in Northern Ireland. Her education continued also in Reading, Berkshire, and Jersey in the Channel Islands. She came from a musical background and also plays the organ, harpsichord and recorder. Elizabeth gained her performance diploma at the Royal College of Music and studied with both John Barstow and Andrew Ball. Currently a professor at Reading University, Elizabeth prepares Associated Board Diploma candidates for performance examinations. She's also a co-founder and artistic director of the North London Performance Academy. She teaches to all levels and runs a busy private teaching practice in North London. Elizabeth regularly performs both as a soloist and accompanist in the UK and Europe. So we can hear first of all what she sounds like as a soloist. From her recordings of Mendelssohn's Songs Without Words, I have chosen her rendition of Opus 67 No. 2 in F sharp minor. So hello again, Elizabeth. It's lovely to have you again with the Sound Bath.
Hello.
Today I would very much like to talk to you about accompanying for singers, because this is something I know that you do quite a lot of.
Yes, I do.
And so I thought it would be interesting because it's not something people talk about a lot. They don't ever really think about the accompanist. And so I thought it would be interesting just to find out, for example, how you first became an accompanist.
Well, it's an interesting, very interesting question, because I didn't intend to become an accompanist originally. I think, like a lot of pianists, I thought, I'll grow up and I'll be a soloist.
Right.
You know, a bit power crazy and everything. And then I realised that really the piano often is, it's a sort of dialogue often between two hands. You often have got your soloist in your right hand and your accompanist in your left. And the demand seemed to be there because a lot of people want accompanists and can't find them. And although I was an active soloist and also a teacher, I found I kept being asked to accompany things and being asked to support people in their endeavours, and then realised that there was a whole other side to playing that perhaps was going to be quite enjoyable if I got into it. So I thought, yes, I know, I'll have a dip into this accompaniment lark, thinking it's going to be quite easy. It wasn't easy at all. It's not easy to accompany. It's a different skill entirely. And I learnt that over the years. I had to achieve a lot of experience in order to accept what an accompanist really needs to do.
Right, because I know nowadays there are special courses that people go to learn to be accompanists, don't they? So if there is someone else out there who are really thinking about perhaps becoming an accompanist themselves, what kind of advice would you give them?
Well, I think people are quite lucky now compared to when I was, thinking of being an accompanist, because there weren't really courses, and there was the odd masterclass available, but there weren't really courses available where you could go train for several years to be an accompanist. So I think my advice to people now would be, first of all, try to train yourself. So do a bit of your own training. Find people who'll work with you. Tell them that you're a trainee. Let them sort of work with you and be patient with you, and vice versa. So work up your experience. So that's the first bit of advice I'd give to people. Because if you're a soloist, you're of course responsible for yourself. But if you're an accompanist, also you're responsible for the other player. And I think that's a bit daunting as well. You have to spend perhaps more than a year accepting and getting used to that fact, the fact that you'll be carrying another person some of the time when you're performing. So you've got other considerations while you're performing. Another thing is, if you can go into accompanying, don't just think you're abandoning your soloistic style, because that will be required often in the middle of a duo. You'll be required to be a soloist suddenly, and then so you've got to put on different hats at different times. So really, an accompanist, it's a bit of a misnomer, because a lot of the time in a duo, for instance, you will be a soloist. But the good thing about it is that you'll be passing the baton on to the other person some of the time. So I would say generally, as an experience, don't think it's going to be a quick fix. Don't think that you're going to learn it quickly, especially if you're trained as a soloist. You have to learn to be patient. You have to learn to be passive. And I think that's quite hard for a lot of pianists, to be passive. There's so much sort of out there in front, leading the rhythm.
But it sounds like you're saying they need to be passive, and then they need to be a soloist in the same piece. That's quite hard, I would imagine, to do.
I think it is, and quite often when I'm listening to accompanists in action, I can hear just how much they've got of each element. And there's some who will only accompany. I'm not one of those, because I was a trained soloist, but there's some people who will only accompany. That's all they've ever done, and those people are particularly receptive type of people that have always been facilitators. They've always been slightly passive in their musical approach. And then soloists is the other extreme. So I think I strive to somehow put a foot in each camp if I can.
That's very, very interesting, isn't it? But before we start talking more in depth about accompanying for singers, I'd like to ask first of all what the major differences are between accompanying for other instruments as opposed to accompanying for singers.
There's quite a lot of difference because a singer is more immediate, lives more in a more emotional world, requires a faster response. And I think when you're accompanying a singer, you have to be almost on the same level, perhaps breathing with the singer, watching the singer very carefully, so that you can dovetail what you're doing into what they're doing, because of that immediacy. So, in other words, I think your reactions have to be faster with a singer than with instrumentalists. Okay. On the good side,
there is one.
You're watching a singer in action. You can judge how long a phrase is going to be usually. With an instrumentalist, they can take you by surprise, or they can rattle along and sort of drive you through prestissimo sections without you being able to breathe. A singer, there's a limit to how fast you can sing, isn't there?
There is.
If I said to you, Angelina, sing me a page of demi-semi-quavers, say at a speed of, say, 160 or something like that, it would be quite tricky, because that's not something the voice naturally does. Whereas you could take a clarinetist or a flautist and they could rattle through, and you wouldn't know where you were if you were. So it's a different thing. I think with because of the phrasing in singing, you can predict what you're going to have to do a little bit more than with an instrumentalist. But then with instrumentalists, sometimes the tempo gets very crazy, very metronomic, and you've got to be right behind that. And very rarely do I have that feeling with the singer.
Oh, right. To follow on from that, I just obviously wanted to ask you a few more questions. So I've worked with many pianists in my life, and in my experience, there is a very clear difference between pianists who are accompanists and those who are pianists only or soloists. So what, in your opinion, makes a good accompanist?
I think a good accompanist is a person who has respect for the person that they're working with, and by that I mean giving their musical opinions equal weight to their own. I think a good accompanist would be somebody who reads a lot into the person that they're working with. So, for instance, everybody is different, and this is what is exciting when you work as an accompanist, because no two people are the same. It's getting onto the same wavelength with where they're going with the musical piece that they're performing, and matching your own sense of dynamics and features and textures to the person in front of you. And I think that takes years. It takes years to do, and there's quite an art to it.
It sounds a bit like psychology.
I'm still working on it.
But it does sound like there's some psychology involved in how you need to approach people then, not just as a musician, but as a person.
Yes, if a person walks into my music studio and they're not feeling comfortable, they're not going to be able to produce what they want at the end of it. And I think you have to get people to feel really comfy, so that they will, even if you have suggestions for change in the performance, if they feel comfortable with you as a person, they will then say, yes, I might do it this way, or I might just change that, or perhaps, yes, I will pause a bit more here. But if they think they're up against some robot who's going to dictate, it can get very fraught and end up with you not being asked to accompany again.